read your book, The Mystery of Love, and you had a few topics laid out that we could talk about.
First, first you have to tell me how much you enjoyed it. Oh my God, I'm going to be devastated otherwise. I've got the knife in my hand. I'm about to plunge it in. I mean,
don't do it, Mark. Don't do it.
Oh my God, stop me now. So I mean, it was. Well, tell me a little bit, and again, I'll do the heavy lifting. But just give me a sense that what part of the book spoke to you.
Oh gosh, it largely made me uncomfortable because I associate the erotic with sex, and
the whole point of the book was that disassociation.
Goodbye.
Right, and I also associate, I look at sex as good sex is holy sex is within marriage, but fun sex is outside of marriage. I've never been married, so I kind of I had this dual reaction to sex. It's like, all the really fun stuff is outside of marriage, but then that's a sin. And then the stuff that is legitimate and allowed and holy, well, that's within marriage, and that must get really boring really quickly. So
it sounds like Levi, you've been stuck in the classical double bind.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So your book was about bringing the erotic into all of life, and bringing the erotic into one's religious world. And for me, I connote eroticism with sex outside of marriage. So I connote eroticism for me equals sin.
Okay, so let's start. That sounds like a good place to start, huh?
Yeah.
So that's good. So let's try and walk through a couple things. Let me just maybe restate for our listeners who have not read Mystery of Love, just like the basic premise of the book, and then we'll start from there just to kind of create a context for conversation. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. So the basic, let me just say, even before saying the basic premise of the book, Mystery of Love is what I would call a frum book, right? And although those who misunderstood it, thought it was kind of very outside of the pale, radical statement about Eros, actually, the understanding implicit in Mystery of Love, right, is the deep understanding both of many passages in the Talmud, right, many passages in the Talmud, a number of biblical passages, and an enormous amount of Hasidic and Kabbalistic passages. And if you noted, there were primary source footnotes, 30, 40 pages of primary source footnotes at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. So that's just kind of to set a context. And it's not, Mystery of Love is not a pop book, right, in any sense, shape, or form. And again, I say this not, just to kind of set its context, I received a beautiful email from Professor Elliot Wolfson. He's a major professor of Kabbalah in America, who I don't know. I didn't know at the time. When he read the book, he wrote me a beautiful email about, what he thought was really a correct reading of the sources. So it's a serious book, in that sense. Now let me just kind of state its premise. Its premise is, and I'm using the word eros, I could use a different word, but I'm using the word eros because it's the best word in the English language that connotes it. And what you point out, of course, is that in the English language, we tend to conflate the erotic and the sexual, eros and sex. Yes. I'm using the word eros much closer to how Plato used the word, okay, in his dialogues, in which eros meant something like, I'm not interpreting Plato, I'm moving out of Plato, but it meant something like the way we would use the word in Aramaic today, or Hebrew, Zohar. Zohar, which is of course the book of Hebrew mysticism, right? Zohar, means something like eros, and actually, scholars of Kabbalah have already pointed this out, that the words Zohar and eros actually are related terms. Actually, a man named Yehuda Liebes, whose father, Joseph Liebes, was a Platonic scholar, and he's one of the two major Kabbalah scholars in Israel, actually wrote an article called Zohar and Eros about this very thing. Okay? So far we haven't said anything, right? We've just talked around it. So let's now actually say something, right? So Eros means, right, or the four major faces of Eros are fullness of presence, right, full presence, right, being on the inside, not on the outside. That is to say, being in the flow of it, being on the inside of the conversation, on the inside of the writing, on the inside of the filmmaking, on the inside of the eating, on the inside of the prayer, as opposed to being on the outside of it. You just have to go to any synagogue to know what it means to be on the outside of the prayer, right?
Yeah.
Right. So to be on the inside of it. So that's the second. being on the inside. The third is the experience of wholeness. That is, I'm not separate from, I'm both an individual and I'm part of a larger whole. That's called wholeness, right? We call it in Hebrew shalom or shlemut, to be whole. To know that I'm not a whole by myself, that's called heresy in Judaism, but I'm part of a larger whole. That's the essential, most important single idea in all the entire Jewish mystical tradition. I'm not a whole by myself, I'm part of a larger whole, and there's an interconnectivity between all of being. There are invisible lines of connection between all of being. That's the third. And the fourth major face of Eros is yearning. Right, to participate in the yearning of being towards redemption or towards wholeness, towards completion, towards goodness. So if I had to say it, in one sentence, just in kind of really bullet points, so Eros is, interiority, right, being on the inside, wholeness, right, yearning, presence, full presence. Now, those qualities are not something that you would want to limit to the sexual. Although on a good day, which doesn't happen often, right, but on a good day, those qualities may be found in the sexual, right, but they're not limited to the sexual, right? Those are qualities we would want to actually fill or define, right, or characterize all of our lives. Now here's the key move. There's two key moves, and I'm done with the summation, and before I go on, I open up and turn it back to you. Okay, but here's the two key moves the book makes. And it's, again, the book makes it extrapolating it, taking it out, learning it from, deriving it from, reading carefully, right, all the holy Jewish texts, for a few decades. Right, so here's what the holy Jewish texts say in a very beautiful way. The sexual, clearly within its most best and appropriate context, we're not talking about that yet, but the sexual in its best context models Eros. Right? Meaning the sexual, in its most sacred context, models what it means to experience being on the inside. Not on the inside of the person, on the inside of the experience. Right? Fully showing up, fullness of presence. Yearning, right? The urge to merge. Right? And the experience that I'm actually connected, part of a larger field with another person, and I'm not locked in my separate self. So those four qualities, we might call in Hasidism those four faces of the chariot, those four qualities of Eros, and now you actually reveal the big thing. Eros really here is just another word for holiness. Because those are really the four qualities of the holy. Right? Those are the four qualities of the holy, which is why in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, above the ark, there were two cherubs, not like the Hallmark variety, who were sexually intertwisted. Right? Because the sexual models holiness. Right? But here's the key. It models holiness in its most holy context, but it doesn't exhaust holiness. So here's the whole big thing, and then we're done. Here's the whole big, huge, gorgeous, stunning, and really beautiful, brilliant Jewish deep understanding, which I was trying to reflect and unpack in this book, which is, if I try and fill my need for Eros, that is for holiness, that is for these four qualities, right? Interiority, inside, yearning, presence, wholeness. If I try and fill them, get them all filled up, get them all met, get all that basic need for those four qualities, if I try and get that need met simply by the sexual is going to collapse. Because the sexual actually can't fill that basic need of a human being. The sexual can only fill sexual needs. When we look to the sexual to actually provide us with that, when we're not getting it in the rest of our lives, so the rest of our lives become empty and dead and filled with ennui and depression and addiction, right? And we ask the sexual to do something that it can't possibly do, that is to fulfill our Eros holiness needs, and the sexual collapses under the burden, right, under the weight of a burden that it can't possibly bear. So therefore, what we need to do is view the sexual in its most holy vision as our teacher, because it teaches us what's possible. Right? And then I need to actually be engaged with that same kind of holiness in Eros in writing, in study, in ethical business, right? Interactions with people. I need to be fully present, feel myself part of the larger field of being with them. Be on the inside of the conversation, not on the outside of the conversation, etc., etc. So that idea is actually what classical firm Yiddishkeit is based on. Classical, Orthodox Jewish teaching, is based on. So that's the major. Before we talk about inside